Week 13 of the fantasy football season. He is the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. So Thanksgiving week, week 13 here. Usually there's no bye weeks, and now every team playing these rankings, some of the guys you think should be up higher are going to be lower on this list. Number one, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So last week he went off with a monster ball game. Over 55 fantasy points was Jahmyr Gibbs, where he had over 200 yards rushing, 11 catches in that game. And what a season it's been for him, where he just needed the ball a little bit more. Last season, Montgomery had a little bit more share in that backfield. But this season, we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs break out even more in a big way. And this week, even versus a tough Packer defense, I think he still goes out there and has a big game. Number two, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. Another solid season for CMC. I know the yards per carry haven't been great, but total yards per game have been great, and obviously a big option out of the backfield catching the football. So this week, I know he's versus a good defense at the Cleveland Browns, but Christian McCaffrey, he goes out there and he just makes things happen and put up points. Number three, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So this week, a tough matchup versus arguably the best defense in the league in the Houston Texans. Last week, this Texan defense, they had a great game versus a good offense in the Buffalo Bills. So this week, this could be a grinded out type of ball game in Indianapolis, but still Jonathan Taylor, he's a matchup-proof running back. I know in two tough games this season at Pittsburgh, he didn't have a good game, and last week he didn't have a good game versus Kansas City, but this week back home, I think he bounces back. Number four, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. I know maybe I'm higher on Henry than consensus, but this week a slam dunk matchup. Cincinnati Bengals coming to town. It's a Thanksgiving game as well, where we know these Thursday night games are usually high scoring, and this defense is horrible. So I think Henry goes out there, has a big game. Number five, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. What a season it's been for Devon Achane. New Orleans coming in, one of the worst defenses in the league as well. When Achane, he could do it all, catch the football out of the backfield. Home run hitting ability like a Jahmyr Gibbs as well, but obviously not to that level. And this week, freshened up a little bit off the bye, I think you have a big game. Number six, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. It's been another solid season for Bijan, but some weeks we just see him only score that 10, 13 fantasy point range like it did last week in a plus matchup on paper versus New Orleans. But this week, good matchup once again at the New York Jets. This Jet defense really isn't that good. We saw Henry last week have a good game versus D, and I think in the cold weather here in this ball game, they're going to rely on Robinson a little bit more than they did last week in New Orleans. Number seven, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. James Cook, it's been another monster season for him. He got the contract extension, and rightfully so. He's going out there, he's making plays, he's catching the football more out of the backfield, which is always a plus. And this week at Pittsburgh, it's a pretty decent matchup for James Cook, where you thought Pittsburgh with all these Pro Bowlers on that defense would be better against the run, but weekly they're giving up a decent amount of points. Number eight, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. I expect him to be back in the lineup this week. Last week he sat out, and we saw Emmanuel Wilson fill in and have a monster game, over 100 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. So this week a good matchup with the Lions. Last week Tyrone Tracy went out there, had a productive day versus this defense, and this could be a potential high-scoring game on Thanksgiving versus these division rivals. Number 9, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last week a good game it was for Travis Etienne, and this season's been a nice bounce-back year for Etienne. So this week a good matchup at the Tennessee Titans. Obviously one of the worst teams in the league, and Etienne can do it all, catch that football out of the backfield, in between the tackles, and under Liam Cohen in his first year as the head coach, they found great ways to get him open and make plays. Number 10, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Barkley even admitted he's in a funk a little bit of Saquon Barkley. This week a decent matchup, Chicago Bears coming to town. Black Friday ball game, so that's another ball game to add to the week earlier here. And Saquon, like I said, last season, a lot of wear and tear, obviously. Touching that football over 300 times, it's going to take a toll on you and rushing for 2,000 yards. So this week versus Chicago, we'll see if Saquon Barkley could get out of the slump a little bit. Number 11, Trevion Henderson of the New England Patriots. So Trevion Henderson, he was on a nice tear for a little bit, but obviously Ramondre Stevenson returned to the lineup last week, but Henderson, to me, is obviously the way better back between the two guys. I know his pass protection isn't that great compared to with Stevenson, and he's not as big as a physical back, but we've seen when Stevenson was out, him handle a workload. And last week, he still had the 18 carries, though. Decent ball game, even though it was a slam dunk matchup on paper at Cincinnati. But this week, I think he bounces back on Monday night versus the Giants. Number 12, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. Chase Brown, he's been steady over the last few weeks for the Cincinnati Bengal team. And now with Joe Burrow in the lineup, even if he's not 100%, it just improves this lineup as a whole. And now with T. Higgins out with a concussion in this ball game, I think Chase Brown, we could see him catch the football a little bit more in this one out of the backfield, even though Andre Yoshivas, I think, is a decent number 2 receiver to fill in. But like I said, volume's been there for Chase Brown. He's getting a lot of work, and this week it's a pretty decent matchup at Baltimore. 13, Kyren Williams to the Los Angeles Rams. So Kyren Williams, it's been a pretty solid season for him after getting an extension in training camp. And this week a pretty good matchup at the Panthers, where last week they just gave up 140 total yards on the ground in that ball game to Christian McCaffrey. So Kyren Williams catch the football out of the backfield. In between the tackles, he could run. And this week at Carolina, I expect him to have a solid game. 14, Ashton Jeanty of the Vegas Raiders. Jeanty last week, he had a solid game, and it's been a pretty decent rookie year. I know this is a bad offense as a whole. The only 2 bright spots this season have been Jeanty and Brock Bowers at times. Bad offensive line, but Jeanty getting a little bit better out of the backfield, catching the football. And this week, once again, at the Chargers, they'll be chasing points at their division rival. 15, Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers. Rico Dowdle last week, he got bottled up, but he still had 11.3 fantasy points in PPR leagues. The Los Angeles Rams are coming in, and their defense has been solid this season, no doubt about it. Los Angeles, the best team in the NFC right now, and arguably the NFL. So Rico Dowdle, he's taking claim of the backfield going back early in the season, and he's just been a physical and solid back all season long. So even if they're trailing, he still could catch the football out of the backfield. 16, Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Bucky Irving finally going to return to the lineup. Todd Bowles said he's going to practice all week. And this week, it's a good matchup to get him back into the thick of things versus Arizona, where last week Travis Etienne had a nice game versus defense. The only thing, we'll see how the touches go in this backfield with Bucky Irving, Rachaad White, Sean Tucker. But Bucky, I think they gave him a couple extra weeks to get 100%. And right now, they barely got a division lead, is this Tampa Bay Buc team. So this week versus Arizona, it's a big game. And possibly we could see Irving get that 20, 25 touches, because we know he's a good receiver as well. And a full 3 down back out of the backfield. 17, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Breece Hall last week, it was good to see him do some work in the receiving game, where that's been a staple of his game throughout his career. But for whatever reason this season, when Justin Fields was in there quarterback, he wasn't getting a lot of reception. So last week, like I said, he had 74 yards receiving the football, was Breece Hall. And this week, a pretty good matchup with Atlanta coming in. 18, Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. Javonte Williams, maybe I'm low on him this week than consensus. I know there's no competition in that backfield. Then he's going to get 85, 90% of the touches in that backfield. When Malik Davis signed off the practice squad for Dallas, had a few touches last week, and Turpin had a couple as well. But obviously, Turpin fumbled, and Javonte got the bulk of the work. So this week, even in a tough matchup versus Kansas City, I think he could go out there, have a decent game. Team Kamini Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers. I know Amarian Hampton, one-day window opened up where possibly he could return this week, but I don't know for sure if Hampton's going to get back into the thick of things, even though the plan all along was him to come back from that ankle. But Harbaugh said they're going to take a wait-and-see approach. So right now, if it's Vidal or Hampton, we'll see who the guy's going to be. But this week, I think one more week they could go with Vidal. It's a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, a defense that can't stop anyone. And Vidal, he's been filling in pretty well more weeks than not for Amari and Hampton. So this week with a good matchup versus Vegas, I have him as a number 2 RB for fantasy owners. But if Hampton does come back, I could see it a little bit being a 50-50 split. 20, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Warren, he got banged up a couple weeks ago with an ankle injury. And last week in that ball game versus Chicago Bears, it pretty much was a 50-50 split with Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell. Gainwell, way better receiver out of the backfield we've seen this season than Jaylen Warren. This week it is a good matchup on paper where Buffalo's run defense isn't any good, but Jaylen Warren, like I said, now when a 50-50 split, it looks like he drops down a little bit. 21, RJ Harvey of the Denver Broncos. So this week a slam dunk matchup at the Washington Commanders, a defense that can't stop anyone all season long. They're banged up as well with injuries is part of the reason. And also obviously with J.K. Dobbins out for the season, Harvey and Jaleel McLaughlin are going to be the 2 backs over here. But Harvey with a good upside as a pass catcher out of the backfield. A guy who's got some home run hitting ability as well, where he could take one to the house. And we've seen him have some big games this season. So now with more work and coming off a bye, I think the role gets expanded even more. 22, Quinshawn Junkins of the Cleveland Browns. So this week, a pretty decent matchup. San Francisco coming in. I don't think their run defense is all that great. But without Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, they're still playing good defense this season. is this San Francisco 49er team. But Quinshon Judkins, he's getting a lot of work all season long. Obviously, with the rookie quarterback Shedeur Sanders in his second career start, they're going to want to keep this game close for the majority of it and rely on the run, I believe. 23, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. Kenneth Walker, he hasn't had a great season, but the last couple weeks he's come around a little bit for this Seattle Seahawks team. And the Seahawks team, one of the better teams in the league. This week, a good matchup with the Minnesota Vikings coming in. And we saw a backup running back last week, Emmanuel Wilson, torch him for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground in that game. So this week, Walker and Charbonnet, I think, could be a decent combo, but Walker has more upside with his playmaking ability and catching the football out of the backfield. 24, Aaron Jones, we're staying in the same game of the Minnesota Vikings. So him and Jordan Mason, almost a 50-50 split, but Jones has more upside, better in between the tackles and yards per carry, can catch the football out of the backfield. The only thing, more times than not, Jordan Mason is the goal line back for this Minnesota Viking team, but the veteran Jones still goes out there. He has good talent. This week it is a tougher matchup, and that's why he's down, barely making a top 24, 25. Woody Marks of the Houston Texans. So this backfield is Woody Marks is over there for this Houston Texan team. Woody Marks can catch the football out of the backfield in between the tackles. I know he's a smaller back, but he still had some decent games so far this season. But this week at Indianapolis, in a grinded out type of game, I don't think the ceiling is that high. 26, Devin Neal of the New Orleans Saints. And Neal, he was a hot waiver wire pickup this week off the waiver wire. Alvin Kamara has an MCL sprain, and he's most likely going to be out a couple weeks, I will believe. And also with New Orleans going nowhere this season, why not just play another youngster and put him in the lineup? So this week it is a good matchup in Miami. I think Neal's going to get a majority of the touches. We'll see Estime mixed in there as well. And Taysom Hill I could see as well at the goal line getting some of those touches. So not a high ceiling for Neal, but still someone who's got a chip on his shoulder as a late round pick trying to make an impression. 27, Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals. So Trey Benson, could this be the week he's finally back in the lineup? We saw Bam Knight got banged up in the end of that ball game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 12. And Trey Benson last week, he was getting a little bit working on the side, and his window opened up to play in these games. So possibly this week at Tampa Bay, Benson is back in the lineup. 28, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Kareem Hunt, last week he had a big ball game versus the Indianapolis Colts, and I know Isaiah Pacheco's returning to the lineup, but this is Kareem Hunt's backfield. Last season, filling in for Pacheco majority of the season, he was the better back. This year, it hasn't even been close, and Kareem Hunt, regardless with Pacheco back, has been the goal line back all season long. And at times, Rashard Smith will come in for a change of pace back here and there. But this week, it's a decent matchup at Dallas. The defense has definitely improved with 2 great front line guys. And Quinnen Williams, they traded for a couple weeks ago. And obviously, they got Frank Clark, who was a great run stopper in the Parsons deal before the season. So with those 2 guys at the line, it's tougher to run on Dallas, where we did see last week they obviously shut down Barkley, but this week I still think Hunt is a back-end option. 29, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. Last week he outperformed easily Devin Singletary, even though the touches were still pretty close between these 2 running backs in the backfield, even though Tracy's got more explosiveness, better receiver out of the backfield as well. And this week it's not a great matchup in New England, and it could be a game where the Giants are trailing early and often. But like I said, Tyrone Tracy's the back to own over here for this New York Giant team. And with his receiving prowess, I still think could go out there and make plays. Number 30, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. So this week, a very tough matchup versus one of his former teams at the Philadelphia Eagles, where they run defense, one of the better units in the league. I know last week it was a bad loss for Philadelphia, blew a 21-0 lead and lost 24-20 to the Dallas Cowboys, getting shut down pretty much the last 3 quarters of that ball game. But the other thing as well, now we're seeing Kyle Monangai eat into the workload, and the last 2 weeks find the end zone where Swift hasn't. So with all those factors, Swift is nothing more than a back-end option. 31, Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. So like I said earlier, he's not going to catch the football out of the backfield to Charbonnet. He's in a 50-50 split, where it's pretty much obviously all runs for Charbonnet and goal line work. But if he's not getting that goal line touchdown, obviously his value isn't great. But this week it is a decent matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings. Their run defense has been worse week after week now. 32, Kenneth Gainwell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he's eaten into the work as well as Kenneth Gainwell the last couple weeks of Jalen Warren. And Gainwell, good pass catcher out of the backfield. They like him in between the tackles at times as well. We saw early in the season in one of those overseas games versus Minnesota, Gainwell go off for a big game. So this week, even if he's getting, let's say, 11, 13 touches in this game, I still think he could put up some okay numbers. 33, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. He's definitely been phased out over the last few weeks, and rightfully so. When you got a running back like Jahmyr Gibbs, who could do it all, obviously, with home run ability, every time he touches the ball, he has a chance of finding the end zone. We saw it on a few runs in last week's game, and also his pass protection's better and catching the football out of the backfield. You're not going to have a guy like David Montgomery see the field much. So this week in a tough matchup, and like I said, they want Gibbs out there even more, is this Lion offense, especially ever since Dan Campbell took over the play calling duties. He's just nothing more than a flex to a deeper league option. 34, Kyle Monangai of the Chicago Bears. So the last couple weeks, he's found the end zone as Monangai. And going back weeks ago at Cincinnati, where he went off for a big game, over 170 yards on the ground, is Monangai. He's a physical back in between the tackles. This week it is a tough matchup at Philly, but I've said this in other videos. I think head coach Ben Johnson, he wants to operate this offense like he did with the Lions when he was the coordinator, with two backs pretty much in a timeshare like he did with Gibbs and Montgomery, and now we're seeing it with Swift and Monangai. 35, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So pretty much Stevenson, he's got no ceiling really for this New England Patriot team of fantasy owners. Trevion Henderson, the way better back. He could do it all out of the backfield, and he has that home run hitting ability. And this week it is a good matchup with the Giants coming into town. But like I said, I don't think the upside is great for Stevenson, especially with Henderson there. So he's pretty much a guy you got to bank on to get that goal line touchdown. And the 36 and final backs, Chris Rodriguez of the Washington Commanders. So this week a tough spot versus arguably the best defense in the league, with the Denver Broncos coming in this ball game for Chris Rodriguez. So Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Rodriguez overtook him in their last ball game before they went on bye week versus the Los Angeles Rams. And Rodriguez, a better pass catcher out of the backfield, more speed in between the tackles. I know Krosky-Merritt more of a physical back, but like I said, Rodriguez is the back tone over there for the Commanders. But this is a tough matchup this week, and I don't see much of a game from him in this one. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.